Good evening. I'm Carolyn Rye, Chair of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach, and I hereby call this meeting to order at 5 p.m. on this first day of September 2021. Pursuant to the Virginia State Health Commissioner's Order of Public Health Emergency statewide requirement to wear masks in K-12 schools issued August 12, 2021, and Virginia Acts of Assembly Number 1303, Chapter 456, and the CDC guidance for K-12 schools, and the school board's 21-22 reopening plan adopted August 10th, 2021. The school board's vote on August 24th, 2021 to follow the health mitigation protocols used by the school administration. It's determined physical distancing will be used in school board chambers as a health mitigation strategy. Therefore, there will be limited seating available on a first-come, first-served basis beginning shortly before this meeting today. Members of the public, as always, are able to observe the school board meeting through live streaming on vbschools.com, broadcast on VBTV Channel 47, and on Zoom. With that, Madam Clerk, please take the verbal roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Currently in school board chambers are Chairwoman Rye, Ms. Melnick, Ms. Felton, Ms. Owens, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Weems, and Ms. Holtz.
And for the record, Mrs. Franklin and Mrs. Manning are absent due to family obligations, and Mrs. Hughes due to a scheduled out-of-town travel. Purpose of today's special meeting call. The school board has called this special meeting for the purpose of reviewing, making recommendations, or taking actions regarding how the school board conducts meetings, accepts public comments at certain meetings, prepares for meetings, and handles decorum, order, and safety and healthy mitigation protocols at meetings. The school board reserves the right to address related matters that may arise during the special meeting. All school board members were notified of the purpose of this special meeting at the August 24th, 2021 meeting by subsequent communication and by the publication of the agenda for this meeting. With that, we come to adoption of the agenda. Motion to approve. Mrs. Holtz, second. Mrs. Anderson, any discussion? Okay, hearing none, please show your approval with a raised hand.
Madam Chair, we have 7 ayes.
And that's how the number presently. Okay.
The motion did pass.
Okay, and Mrs. Riggs is expected to join us. Okay. So I'd like to start today's meeting by noting that the purpose of this special meeting is for the school board to devote time to discussing and proposing solutions or changes to how the school board conducts meetings and how public comment is incorporated into meetings. At numerous school board meetings in the past year, school board members have also suggested that the school board consider changes to how meetings are run. So tonight's meeting is an extension of this ongoing dialogue, with a focus on identifying the concerns and proposing changes that will improve school board meetings. I don't believe it would be productive for members to focus on specific incidents from prior school board meetings here. What I suggest is that members focus tonight's discussion on making recommendations that will address any concerns. If agreed upon recommendations require changes to bylaw or policy, those recommendations can be forwarded to Mrs. Riggs and the Policy Review Committee to develop language for amendments. If the agreed upon changes do not involve bylaw or policy, school board members can either make a motion this evening for consideration or can have proposals added to a future agenda. So finally, with that being said, I'd like to suggest that we begin discussion by considering what the school board considers to be the priority during regular school board meetings. Do we want to find a balance between incorporating public comments into these meetings and handling the business of the board, or do members put more weight on one or the other? I think if we can identify the priority, then we will be more productive in finding solutions. So I welcome all those joining us today in person and via television or live streaming or Zoom, and I now open the floor up to discussion. Who would like to begin? Okay, Mrs. Anderson.
Well, I think about 4 years ago, we changed our bylaws to lengthen the time that we have speakers speaking at our meetings. And we went for many, many years, like more than 20 years, we had people speaking to the school board at 3 minutes each. We changed it about 4 years ago, I think, to 4 minutes. And I would like to see us revert back to the 3 minutes. The 4 minutes, I believe if they have something to say, they probably can say it probably in 2 minutes, but we can give them 3 minutes to elaborate some more. I feel it's important that we hear people, but what's happening lately is that we have so many people coming to speak, we're not able to get to the business of the school board until sometimes 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, when we finally are able to get to the business. So I think we need to go back to 3 minutes. That's just my recommendation. And, I welcome anybody else to give their opinion on this as well. Thank you.
Right. Anything else to comment on at this time, or you'll wait?
I'll wait for others.
Okay. Ms. Owens?
So I agree with Ms. Anderson that I would like us to look at our timing that we have for our speakers. More so, I've noticed in recent, I guess the last few months, that we've had times when speakers came in to speak but had to leave because it was past 10 p.m., past 11 p.m., and they still hadn't gotten an opportunity to speak. And I think in the vein of trying to hear from as many individuals who would like to be able to have their voices heard, having a system, something in place that's going to allow for more people to be heard, and if that's by shortening the time, I think that that's something that we need to consider. A couple other, just throwing them out there for discussion, considerations that I would be open to. When we have minors who are coming to speak, I would be open to an option of allowing minors to speak prior, be moved up to the front of the line to provide their comments first, and be able to then have the option to stay, and if they have a parent who's going to speak, stay and wait for the parent for wherever the parent is in the line. But if they have somebody else coming to pick them up or some other option, that they're able to speak and participate in the process that governs their schools, but still be able to make it home and do all the rest of the things that we know our students need to be able to do. It also hopefully can limit some of the extra stuff that our students were being exposed to, that I think they should have the option to, if they would like to stay and hear all the speakers, by all means, they should have that option. But if they would like to come and share their feelings and speak, and then not hear some of the other things that are being said, which haven't been kind always, and haven't been kind always to students, that gives them the option to have boundaries with their own mental health and their own well-being. And so that's a suggestion I would throw out, and I'm open to feedback and dialogue and pros and cons with it. The other thing I would throw out there is that I've seen some other locality, and I can't tell you where it is, who had a graduated timing system, meaning they had something like, if you have 0 to 10 speakers, they can have 4 minutes each. If you have 10 to 20 speakers, then they are down to 3 minutes and 30 seconds each. If you have more than 20 speakers, we're bringing them down to whatever, 2.5 minutes. And that way, we're allowing, time for people to speak, but we're also making room when there are others who want their voices to be heard. And so I'm open to having feedback and dialogue on that. And then I guess my last thought, which I've expressed many times in previous meetings, is that I don't love the current system that has some of our speakers broadcast and some of them not broadcast, where we have the separation with our agenda items and our non-agenda items. I know that there are pros and cons, I'm sure, with the combination of that, but I'd like to discuss the possibility of just combining agenda and non-agenda speakers, giving them their 3 minutes and allowing them to speak on whatever they choose to speak on for their 3 minutes or whatever, and then we move on to the next speaker. And I think if that helps limit some of the interjections that have to happen as a board, to keep people on topic for agenda topics and non-agenda topics, that that might help kind of the interactions that we're having. If people feel like they're able to say whatever it is that they need to say without interruption, as long as it's not obviously cursing or something outside of the realm, then allowing them to say it for 3 minutes and not having the differentiation of who's going to be broadcast, who's not going to be broadcast, and where we need to interrupt, because it's a lot to keep track of, I think, for the chair and for the public. And so those are my thoughts, but I'm open to feedback and discussion on them.
Okay. Mrs. Felton and Mrs. Riggs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just like I said, thank you for the opportunity. And just to reiterate what some of the things Ms. Owens has said about the minors, the students, being able to have them to speak and have them to come forward first to speak. The hours does grow late, and I know as we go into the school system, school time, if they're here to speak, I would like to put that out there if we would consider them being first speakers. I know that there is some pullback on that because of people saying that the students being baited to speak on someone else's behalf. But still, with that said, I think out of respect of the students, and it is about the students, I think we should allow them to have first come service at that time. If I can be corrected, I just have to say that having all speakers to speak, I think this board, or I can say myself, I remember saying yes, and I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago or a year ago, the topic was so hot that we decided to let every speaker speak. And I believe we gave a nod to let every speaker speak at that time. And I think the situation that we have now, we created that situation, or I'll take the blame. I created a situation because I want every speaker to speak on that hot topic. I think it has gotten away from us. I think we need to call it in a little bit. My balance would be, I would like for the speakers to continue to have 4 minutes, but to curve the time. Out of respect for administration, out of respect for others that are listening, especially the teachers, when we have to do other business that determines what they're going to do throughout the year. We don't get to that until late at night. So I'm saying if we're going to start the speakers at 6:15 or 6 o'clock, that we consider saying speakers that give them 2 hours, give them an hour and a half, and that be it. And they can either come back to the next meeting, or they can email us, or they can reach out to us. But I would like to keep that 4 minutes there, but curtail how long we have speakers to speak. I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Riggs, then Mrs. Weems.
I think it's a good idea to let the young students speak first. However, oftentimes the students that are coming to speak, they have a parent with them that is going to speak too. So, I mean, the parent might not be on there till later. Hopefully, they would be, one of the first ones, but that's not a guarantee. So, are we defeating the purpose by giving them that? And I think that that's something that we need to look at additionally. So I think that's nice. And I agree. But again, like I said, you've got both of them speaking. Sometimes you have multiple children from a home and a parent. And if we're letting the children go first and the parent got signed up at a later time, it's not beneficial. Okay, they're going to have someone else come pick their children up. Again, that's inconvenient for them, I'm sure. So that's something to think about. And as far as dividing the subjects, I know that Ms. Owens was talking about that, and just letting everybody speak on non-agenda and agenda items, and not calling them non-agenda and agenda, and just one they can speak. I think, and I'm open to listen. I have no. But I think the reason why it was stopped years ago, and I don't know how many years, you might know, Mrs. Weems, because you were on the board. I was attending the school board meetings, but I don't remember how long ago. I know that there's the problem with people's names being mentioned, employees, teachers, and children, students. That's not something that we want to leave open. I think that was one of the reasons I did reach out to a previous board member that has a lot of institutional knowledge and asked, why was that done? That was one of the reasons, because you had people that were coming with concerns about a child's teacher or administrator of the school or other children, and names were being said and voiced while they were speaking, about them. So I think it's protection of our students and of our employees. So that's something that we need to consider, and that's, I think, why it happened. Would it do what Ms. Owens said as far as having to keep people on topic? If they're not on agenda, it probably would, by putting them together. So I just wanted to throw that out there. As far as changing our minutes, I was one that would wholeheartedly agree to change it to 4 minutes, because I've spoken before the board too, before I was elected to be on the board. So I know sometimes you need that time. But as I've been serving on it this last year with the many topics, or the several topics that have been very important to people, sometimes if they have more time than they really need, I think they can get the information out in 3 minutes. If we have a huge amount of people speaking, I don't know if the graduated thing would work, because then you have people that were like, wait a minute, I didn't get my 4, and they did, So I don't know. I don't know what would be fair, but I think we need to look at timing in some way, shape, form, or fashion. But that's my thoughts for now.
Okay, Mrs. Weems.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I think that the process of having agenda and non-agenda not being on camera was done 2 years before I got on the board. Because I did actually call another board member that said it was done during their tenure, and it was 2 years before I did. And you're right, it was because they had speakers to come and say, my child's first grade teacher, Mrs. Smith, did this and was awful, and my child's principal, we can't stand, and they would name, or our bus driver. So that was the main reason why they did that. But in all honesty, someone could still do that anytime, because we've seen some that have been, in some people's opinion, off agenda or not on topic. So really, they could come anytime and say that, and hopefully they would be gavelled and said that's inappropriate. Please, discuss that with your principal directly. But so I'm not sure if that's going to solve that problem. I definitely do not want to limit the number of speakers that can come. If we limit it to an hour and a half or 2 hours, that is only 25 to 30 speakers. Of course, it would get us out of here earlier, and it would be nice for our employees, but we are dealing with so many topics, and it's unfortunate that they're every 2 or 3 weeks, and they're very passionate topics that parents want to be heard. And if we say we're only going to let the first 25 speak, in my opinion, that is wrong, and it will be met with much criticism by our public, as it should be. So I think that during these times where we have subjects that are very opinionated and passionate, that we owe it to our public to sit here. And if it's 1 or 2 in the morning, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. So I don't want to limit the number to only an hour and a half worth of speakers or 2 hours so we can do business. I don't think we can really prioritize business at hand and public input, because to me, they go together, because we're talking about the education of our public's children. So I think that we've got to keep that balance, and I think we have. I think we've done business and we've listened to input, and I think we need to continue to do that. As far as agenda, non-agenda, I think that I agreeing with Ms. Owens. I think that it would be easier on everybody if we just said, come, speak, what you want to say about anything that has to do with education. Because it is so difficult for our chair to be able to say what's exactly on topic, what's off topic. It takes the speaker a while to get on topic if they're saying a few words. They might get off topic for a couple sentences and then back on topic. And I don't want to get into the situation to put our chair in the situation of constantly off topic. Oh, sorry, no, I'm getting on topic. And then y'all are having this dialogue, the two of you back and forth. And it hasn't served us well or the public. And it puts the chair in a very awkward, very subjective position that I don't think that's good or fair for anybody involved. So I'm kind of fine with just kind of putting them all together. And then, of course, if they come and start, bashing a teacher or calling names, that they would, be told that that's inappropriate. The 3 to 4 minutes, I mean, that's a tough one. I was for 4 minutes too, because, before I ran, I came to the school board several times, and I remember getting that, I have to finish in the middle of my sentence and not being able to finish what I wanted to say. I had thought earlier, like Jessica did, if you had 30 speakers, once it hit over 30, then let's go down to 33 minutes. The problem with that, which Trinace brought up, is if you don't know that in advance and a speaker comes and says, oh, I thought I had 4 minutes, and then you're telling them they have 3 minutes, so I don't know if the clerk could, the time off is 12 noon. I'm not sure how that information would be given to the speaker to let them know you're the 31st speaker, so you only get 3 minutes. So we can maybe have a suggestion on how to do that, but that was my suggestion early on when Ms. Wright called me, is if we could do, 30 people at 4 minutes is 2 hours. Is that right? Or do I need to go back to first grade math? Yeah. And then, okay. And then after that, then cut it down. I would be more prone to that, because sometimes we're only, believe it or not, sometimes we're only going to have 10 speakers here. And unfortunately, it'll be on the budget. it'll be on the budget, open thing. And so, why limit 10 people to 3 minutes or 4 people to 3 minutes? So I kind of like the 30 person. So that's my thoughts. Combine them all together. Do not dare limit how many people can speak. And then after 30 speakers, somehow if we can coordinate letting them know, cut it down to 3 minutes. I'm putting on agenda and off agenda all lumped up in one. I've got other comments, but I think that's kind of what we're talking about now, so I'll leave that.
Mrs. Melnick, then Mrs. Anderson.
So just something in response to Mrs. Weems, your suggestion. I agree not limiting the number of speakers, but would consider stopping speakers at a certain point, 7:30. I think 90 minutes is fair, just so that we can do the business of the school board and then resume speakers after that point, because there comes a point where we, if it's a busy night and we have 50, 60, 70 speakers, our staff has been here for, in some cases, 17, 18 hours, and they came to this meeting prepared to present on agenda topics, and they're falling asleep in these seats, or they're waiting in their offices or in the hallways to conduct business, and that's what needs to get done. And then you just resume. There also are times that we've had to go into a closed session between midnight and 1 a.m. and we're making or trying to make important real estate decisions or school board decisions. And, for some of us who are up very early, we're knocking on being up for 24 hours, and we have to question, our faculties at that point. Are we making the right decisions? Are we being as smart, and are we as interested as we should be at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning? So just food for thought there. And I think we all agreed with the 4 minutes, that 4 years ago when we did that we did have people that came to speak, and they were struggling at the 3-minute mark to get it in, and honestly, we had 10 speakers. And so, of course, you add a minute, but in fairness to everybody, now that we have so many speakers, is going back to the 3 minutes. That could really allow more people to get in to speak at a decent hour of the evening. And we like to hear them. We like to hear the speakers. We read our emails. All of that is very important to all of us as board members. And so that is my suggestion, and I will add you to the queue. And Ms. Anderson is next.
Okay, so I've given you my opinion about the 3 minutes. And I'm not opposed to doing a staggering, similar to what Ms. Weems said about 30 speakers. Although I'd like to do 10 to 20, 4 minutes, and then et cetera. I think 30 is still 2 hours worth. Originally, when I first got on the board, we did have a 7:30 cutoff. And it was 7:30 cutoff for agenda speakers. Then we would, whatever we needed to do, we did the rest of the of our business, and then we came back to those speakers, to those agenda speakers, and then we voted on. And that's the whole purpose. That was the whole purpose of dividing it to begin with. One of the purposes, because I also spoke to a former school board member who explained to me that not only did we have speakers who were coming and speaking and calling out teachers' names and principals' names and student names, but also we actually had speakers who came in and advertised their businesses, which I know is not that big of a deal to some people, but they were using the TV time to advertise their business. And so once we decided, okay, non-agenda speakers will be after the meeting and they won't be on TV, that stopped. And the stuff about calling out teachers' names and principals' names, that didn't stop, but at least we weren't allowing our employees to be slandered on live TV. And the thing of it is that once somebody starts talking, you know as well as I do, it's difficult to make them stop. So once they've already said the name and they've slandered that employee, the damage is done. You can't take it back. Those words, they're already out there. over the, over the airways. And now in this day and time, not only over the TV airways, they're also on Facebook and everywhere else. So I think I'm still in favor of keeping agenda items separate from non-agenda items. And I was also told of a way that we might be able to do this that might be helpful in that, let me make sure, because I'm looking at all my notes here. One way to divide the speakers is not necessarily about agenda or non-agenda, but would be to ask the speaker if they intend to mention a staff member, like a principal, teacher, if they're complaining about something, they can still come to us and I mean, they have every right to come to us and complain about things like that, even though technically they really should go through their principal. That's where they need to be able to go to complain about something like that. But if they really feel the need to address the school board and the superintendent here in an open meeting, they could still do that. But we could ask them if they would please do that off camera. So, I mean, most people, I think, they want to tell us. They don't necessarily want to complain about a principal or a teacher to the world. They really want to let us know that they're having problems with this. And in many cases, they've already gone through the principal and they haven't gotten the results they wanted. So they come to us to let us know that, hey, there is a problem here. I'm having a communication problem. And I want you all as my elected officials to know about this problem. But if they would agree to do that part off camera, that would be helpful. I think if we limit speakers to 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I feel it's very important that we give precedence to agenda speakers, people who want us to know about their feeling on how we're getting ready to vote on something. And so if we know they're speaking to the agenda, I feel like even if we have them all at one time, I feel like the precedent should be given. I agree with Jessica, Miss Owens, on the fact that, students really should be put at the first of the list. I agree with that. But I also feel like if they're speaking to something that's on the agenda, we should give precedence to that as well, because that's something that we're going to be voting on that night. And as much as we can. If we have 50 or 60 speakers, I think once we get past 20 or 25, we need to cut it drastically down and say, hey, when they call in, they know what number they're going to be. Most people already know. They're told when they call in what number they are. And so they know if they're 21 or 25 or 30. So we would just say, you're number 26. At that point in time, we're going to ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. And then once it gets past 30 or 35, I think we need to go to 2 minutes. I'm sorry, but that's just my opinion on that, because we really should not be dragging these meetings on and on until 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. I think it's hard for our teachers. They want to stay up and listen to see what's happening. It's hard on our staff, which has already been pointed out, who arrives here at 7 o'clock in the morning, sometimes earlier. And so for them to ask them to stay until anything past 11 o'clock at night is really asking a lot of them. So those are just my opinions on this. And by the way, I am taking notes on all these suggestions, because I'm sure we're going to be discussing these in policy. So thank you.
Ms. Owens?
Thank you. I just wanted to take a second to clarify what I was envisioning when I mentioned the graduated timing. I know our cutoff time is 12, and I don't think it's necessarily fair that those who were able to sign up the fastest are going to get more time. So what I was thinking is, at 12, after cutoff time, on our site and on our front door, we say what the time is. So at 12, we had 40 people sign up, and that's how many we are going to have speak. Then we look at our graduated chart, whatever it is that we've decided on, and say, 40 people, that means 3 minutes. put the 3 minute on the site, or put the, whatever on the site, put it on the door. Everybody's going to have the same amount of time. If people are interested and they feel like, oh, I prepared and I want to make sure that I prepare to the right amount of minutes, they have the ability to check in on the site or on the door or a phone call, whatever, and they can know how much time they have. And everybody's going to get the same amount of time because we cut it off early enough that we know how many speakers there are going to be, and everybody gets the same across the board. So that was what I was meaning when I was going with the graduated timing. And then I appreciate the feedback of the moving the students to the front. And I do understand that it's not going to work for all students, that some students are here with one parent, and that's the only parent that they have that's going to be doing transportation. I get it. But I like the opportunity as an option. A lot of the students that we have seen come and speak, we saw here with two parents, or they came with a group of other families. And if there's an option that somebody wants to drive the teens or the littles or whatever, drive them home or go get them dinner or go do something else instead of being inside the building or outside waiting or whatever have you, that we've prioritized them to allow them to do that. And then I think whoever brought up our staff, because obviously that's a concern for all of us, I would like to see us look at the order that we have our things on the agenda. I think that, if we have 50 speakers and they're all 3 minutes each, because we know that at 12 o'clock that day when they've signed up, we know that that's going to give us 150 minutes of speaking, give or take a couple minutes of, changing people over. So we're looking at 8:30 p.m. when we'd be finished with speakers if we were on that kind of graduated system. If we feel like that's too late.
Could you repeat what you just
Sure.
said? Okay.
Okay, so if at 12 p.m. our speaker list is cut off and we see that we have 50 speakers on there, and we say, okay, we know that that falls into our 3-minute time frame. People can look, they know that they have 3 minutes altogether, 50 people, 3 minutes, 150 minutes. So if we start speaking at 6 p.m., then we're looking at about 8:30 when we're going to 150 minutes later. And so we've already kind of planned for that. But if we feel like 8:30 is too late to get started on some of the other business things, then maybe we need to kind of look at the order of our agenda and move some of our staff presentations forward, move our action agenda down, and try and compensate for getting those out who we can have leave earlier. Those who are doing the information presentations, I never really understood, I don't know, the timing of having them wait until after everything was discussed and speakers and voted on, and then starting those presentations. I'm open to the different reasons why we may need to do it a certain way, but if we can have staff members who need to present information to us do that earlier in the meeting, I think it's worth exploring.
Okay, Mrs. Holtz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For years, we've had the 3 minutes. It's only recently that we decided to increase it by 4 minutes, and I actually voted with everybody because I think it was unanimous, but I never really was pleased with it because I think anybody can make a point in 3 minutes because they're not up here to discuss their life history. It's to make a point. And I've spoken before the school board before I was even on the board. And I know I prepared my remarks. I even timed my remarks. And I think people should do more of that. For us to change this now, I would like to. We were going to have a public outroar that, we just can't control. I'm afraid that that's going to happen. So if you have 60 speakers, you're going to have 1 more hour of listening than we had before. And a lot of them come with a particular agenda. They've been handed talking points, and it's very, very repetitious. I really don't think we can control that. So I'm not that strong on it, But what have very strong feelings about is the agenda and the non-agenda items. When, when we have an agenda, that's our topic of the day. And two people already mentioned it. If we're not actually voting on it, we're preparing to vote on it, say in maybe the next meeting. And we really need to give time to the people to talk about that particular topic and not go off and just say anything they want. They're also televised. And that's true about speakers. They're on TV, and you know, their faces there. You would think they would care about what they were saying, so in order to prepare remarks. But let me get back to the agenda items. People speaking on agenda items helps us to make a decision. That's what it's all about. I have, in the past, I have heard people come up with non-agenda items to say anything they can. It's been mentioned by two people, and it's true. You could be angry with a teacher or a principal and say, oh, so-and-so, name them, with totally unsubstantiated, no truth at all to it. But yet, it's public, it's out there. And that's why we decided not to televise that. You know, you can ruin someone's reputation. I mean, it's been tried before. Lately, they have been on issues, not individual people, but still, I think we need to keep our agenda speakers with the agenda. Else we would really never move along with our meeting, because if we heard every 60 people who want to speak before the meeting really got into other business, because usually we have 4 or 5 other things to discuss too, we'd be doing that at midnight. So I really think we should keep the non-agenda items not being televised, and also after the agenda items. As far as the people speaking 3 or 4 minutes, I don't have a firm opinion about that. So I have had people go to sleep during meetings. My daughter calls me in the morning sometimes. I fell asleep because the meeting was too long. Whatever happened? And other people will email me, did you vote on that or did you not vote on that? So, I mean, we're not the only, people just can't stay up till 2 in the morning. Well, it hasn't been 2, but I live 40 minutes from here, so I get home a lot later than that. But I would like to see our meetings shortened. But if we try to shorten them and allow people and cut people's time, they're going to be mad at us. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Mrs. Weems and Mrs. Melnick?
Yes, I do agree that it would be nice to have students first, and I don't see the problem of having, I mean, if a student calls on their own and schedule it, they can be moved up. But if a parent calls and says, I want to speak, and my 3rd grader wants to speak, they're speaking like at the same time because they're signing up at the same time. So I don't see any problem about scooting them all at the beginning for the student's sake. Even if mom calls and is 28th in the queue and she's got her 3rd grade son, or dad has, middle school child, I don't have any problem scooting them at the front. Now, some people might say, well, is a parent going to take advantage of that and bring along their child? But I don't know. I trust that I trust that not to be. I trust that kids that are here to speak are usually with their parents, unless they're high schoolers and they're driving with groups of people. So I think students first makes good sense. I don't have any problem limiting and then getting to business, but we have to remember we can't limit speakers on the agenda items that we're going to be voting about. So we may still have 3 or 4 hours of speakers if we're voting on something. If we're voting on a policy and they're all here. And again, I think the problem comes with how do you determine, it's just really sticky in a gray area of what's agenda and not agenda, and when you're off topic and when you're not on topic. So that's where I agree with Ms. Owens about to make it simple and clear and easy, and everybody gets a voice, and Ms. Rye's not having to try to second guess the speaker, everybody together. But I also agreed that it would be nice to hear the business before we vote. So I'm not sure how you solve that problem. Yeah, I don't know how we're gonna solve that. And again, I do think that, yeah, if we wanna say 30 speakers, and if there's 30 speakers, you each get 4 minutes or 20 or whatever we decide, and then the clerk says, okay, thank you, you're the 31st speaker, so you know that now everybody's gonna get 3 minutes, so that everybody knows. I have no problem with that either, just so the public knows that they're getting 3 minutes versus 4 minutes. And if we do it by posting and by putting it on the website or some email going out, however we do it, just so the folks will know. I don't know if we're gonna, go to different options about making sure the public has our agenda in a timely manner, or are we just gonna stay on this kind of focus for right now? Maybe.
For now.
Okay,
thank you.
okay, that's all. Students first is fine with me. Limiting it once it gets past a certain number, like 30, just so the public knows. But I wanna hear, I still think non-agenda and agenda, unless we can figure out some way to do it in a fair way. But I also do believe that everything needs to be broadcast, because there are a lot of folks that are watching that do want to hear non-agenda items, because a lot of times the non-agenda items might be something that we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks, and they are very interested in hearing it. So I think everything needs to be broadcast.
And Mrs. Williams, could you clarify the one comment about, what did you say about after 30? What was that about?
You know, like Ms. Owen said, if we determine a number that if there's, I'm just throwing 30 out. Everybody gets 4 minutes, except for if we have more than 30 minutes, then everybody's going to get 3 minutes. But that all the, you know, or if we determine that that's 40 speakers, or however we, but I don't believe in going to 2 minutes, because I think it's very, very hard. I mean, Ms. Holtz just made her point in 4 minutes, and I've probably taken 4 minutes. So, you know, so I think it's almost impossible to make a point in 2 minutes. And I don't, and for somebody to take the time to drive all the way down here, stand in line and talk for 2 minutes, that's not enough. So I don't support 2 minutes at all. But I will support going down to 3 minutes if we have huge amounts of speakers.
Okay, Mrs. Melnick.
And I agree with you. I don't like 2 minutes either. And I know we're going to have 2 more opportunities to talk about this at the next 2 school board meetings. But as I've listened to all of you talk about this, just the discussion was confusing about 1 through 30. You get to 31, you're number 31, you down to 3 minutes. But what if 3 people from group 1 through 30 don't show up? Does that mean that numbers 31, 32, and 33 can slide into those spots, and now they automatically get 4 minutes? And so my question would remain, we did 3 minutes for a very, very long time, and I think 3 minutes is a great amount of time, and it's the same for everybody, and everybody has the same 3 minutes to tell us their important business. And the purpose really is not to limit speech, but to allow us to conduct the business of the school board, which is really why we're here. And the speakers are a bonus, but 3 minutes, and if we have 75 speakers, that still is a long time. And like I said before, we appreciate it, and we like to hear from the public, but we have to be able to do this at in a fair amount of time for the people who are watching. And like our last meeting, I made a point at 11:30 at night. I asked a question, and the question was something that teachers were waiting to hear because they were getting ready to start school on Thursday. And they needed a leave question asked, and I didn't get to ask it until 11:30. And so now you have teachers, especially our high school teachers, that waited till 11:30, 12 o'clock at night to hear the answer. And some of them drive upwards of an hour to their school sites, and some of them have to be in the building at 7 o'clock. And so we have to be cognizant of that and still continue to do our business and hear from the public. Personally, I think 3 minutes is fair. And I don't mind combining agenda and non-agenda. I think that we could deal with, the issues that may arise. But I have been calling other districts and asking that question too, and I think a lot of people are combining now. So,
Ms. Martin, may I just clarify what Ms. Melanie said, because I think she's thinking about something different than what I meant.
okay,
Just,
Go
okay.
ahead.
Is that okay? Thank you. No, I'm not saying that, because you're the 31st, you get three, but the others did 4, and you're gonna bump. I'm saying, like, if we have, say we just say the number at 30. If we have 33 speakers, no matter if they're no shows or whatever, 33 have signed up Tuesday at 12, then Regina posts, because we have over 30 speakers, every speaker will be able to speak for 3 minutes. Then and then if they no show, whatever, but all 33 speakers, and even if only 25 show up, they only get 3 minutes. Then the next week, if 8 speakers show up, then Regina says, because we have 8 speakers, we will, every speaker will be,
I
be able to
totally
say
understood that.
4. Okay, I thought you were doing
no,
something else.
I
Okay.
completely understood.
Okay.
I'm just saying perhaps somebody from the public might say, well, 3 people didn't show up. Can I have 4 minutes? And that's why I said
yeah.
it's so confusing.
Okay.
Like to hear it all, it's so confusing. Why wouldn't you just come to the building and know that everybody that walks through the door gets 3 minutes?
Okay. I
And
just
so
wanted to make sure
that's
that-
just my opinion.
Okay.
And and we're going to have 2 other opportunities to talk about this too. So, Ms. Felton.
Yes, Mrs. Felton.
Thank you, Chair Ryan. And I hope that us being here tonight is not all about, there's a lot of things that's happened, there's a lot of moving parts as well. But I really hope we choose the word of consideration. It is a consideration of our students. It is a consideration of our administration. And it's out of consideration for our teachers that's listening to us to handle the business of the board. All the things that's been said tonight, I guess I'll stick with this one because students are important to me, and the business that we conduct here is about the students. So I hope that we can make clear procedures, precise procedures of how the students are going to speak, because I look at it this way. I need for the students to be identified as a student, and whoever comes before them or push back so the students can speak. Even if their parents come, if some other students behind those parents, I think those students should come first if they're in the building, and then the parents speak. And I just believe that, it's going to add probably more work on Regina to make sure that we identify students as students and get them up to the front. And I just believe that we can put forth a precise, clear policy that states, no matter what, the students that are in the building gets to speak first. They are put in front. And then after all the students have spoken, even if that parent was the third, they come behind those students. I just want to make that clear because I am an advocate for that, because when I go to the schools and visit and talk with the students, they said I would come, but it's just so late when it's time for me to speak. I would be there. So however we put that out there, I hope that we make it clear with precise language, with digestible language that the parents and everyone else that's coming understand the students are first. It is about them. And just the consideration of what we're doing here, it is about everyone. It is that the board governs. It is about all of that. I am, if it's the will of the board to do 3 minutes or whatever. But if we're trying to keep everything as is, we will be here 5 o'clock a.m. in the morning. We need to somewhere come down the line of what and how we're going to do. I can't consider having agenda and non-agenda about speaker speaking. And I just like to say we really gonna have to do something. I hope I'm not all over the place, but I think 10 speakers for this division, that ship has sailed long ago. I think we're going to always be bombarded by more than 10 speakers from here on out. I just see it that way because we are such an engaging board. And we encourage people to come down to speak. We do that. And that's what it's all about. And this is why the crowd is growing. This is why the speakers are more. And I expect that as well. But if we don't get away, if you don't hear anything else I say tonight, do consider those students for me priority and time. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll weigh in briefly here. I do think Mrs. Felton and at least one of our members not present tonight made a very forceful case in her email to us about the overall time of the meetings. So there's two choices here, and it doesn't have to be either or, but it's about adjusting the time limit for speakers, individual speakers, and/or adjusting the time limit for total speakers. So I will say this, if in the end the will is not there for adjusting the total number of speakers, then I absolutely would support an adjustment in the time limit for each speaker, because we have to make some headway there. So, for example, if it's 50 speakers and you're getting a minute extra, that's 50 minutes earlier for the meeting. We have all done our due diligence. We've been here as long as we needed to be to complete the business of the board. But it's not just a matter of school board members, some of whom do work, are otherwise gainfully employed and have to get up at a certain hour the next morning. And it's not just about the staff here, who we know all have to be back here to report early in the morning, but it's about the public too, who are parents and work and gainfully employed parents, or just parents of children who need to be up early in the morning. And so for those engaged citizens, whether they're here in person or viewing through electronic or television means, it's an issue for them as well. So I think that has to be recognized. I'm throwing something out there just to see if the board would even consider going with a specific, a combination of time and/or speakers, and just to see if there's support for something like whether we say it's a limit of 3 hours or 50 speakers, whichever comes first. But again, if something like that, I would welcome to get any input on that. But I'll go back to what I said. Short of that, I would most certainly favor the 3 minutes. And I'm happy to hear that there was some mention of agenda adjustment, and a few other members not here tonight, at least one had mentioned this in her email. And it is reverting back to what was done previously. So while it doesn't reduce the length of the meeting, it does, going back to doing the business of the board with the way and I think Mrs. Weems, you started addressing it. So if we did a cutoff of, say, 8 o'clock with speakers, and went back to, and then did our information and consent items. And information often is where we have staff presenting. And then we revert back at that point to speakers and action, as was correctly noted. If there are speakers speaking to any action items, then those we do have the flexibility in our present agenda order to vote on remaining action items later in the evening. So it doesn't totally solve the issue of not getting school board business done late, but at least it will limit its progress. And so I think and as far as the, yes, merging agenda, non-agenda, just knowing that other districts, their experience with this, and I know I understand concerns, but I think we have to face reality too. And so I have kind of myself evolved into seeing the merit in merging the two. And again, I go a lot by what other divisions are doing and also the reality of with our Zoom coverage, it's happening to some degree now. So in terms of the what should I say, in terms of the viewing option. I think your point about I believe it's within our bounds to limit discussion at least to K to 12 business and not be selling your product or whatever. We could talk further or ask council if there's any, further restrictions that could go with that, but, so I'll end it here for now. And Mrs. Anderson.
So, piggybacking off of what you just said, I think that was the problem. If you call it non-agenda speakers and they start advertising their business, I'm not sure we can stop them. And so.
Well, I think
because
if we limit it to K to 12 education.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So non-agenda speakers have to limit it to, but they can still advertise something that they're, want to sell the school division. And that's what happened before. They were advertising their business, their personal business. It was something that they wanted to sell to the school division. It's just not the proper time or place for that. But legally, I don't think we can stop it. If we say non-agenda speakers, even if we say K through 12, it has to be that subject. I don't know, I'm not sure. We'll have to speak to council on that one and see. Ms. Linetti, would you like to speak to that? And then I have a couple more things I want to mention.
Yes, ma'am. Campbell Linetti, School Board Legal Counsel. I think there are a lot of misconceptions as to what the rules are. Make it very clear when we start, and I'm going to give you a mini lesson. I'll be happy to provide you a more fully written legal opinion. There is no right under the First Amendment at a government meeting like this for the public to speak. The only right they have is what you allow them. Now, as of July 1st, the Virginia Freedom Information Act was amended, and you do have to, at 1/4 of your meetings, provide an opportunity for the public to speak. And that doesn't mean time. That means 1/4 of your meetings total during the year. You have to allow the public to address you in a manner that you determine. After that, you determine what you're opening up the public comment for. You can absolutely limit what they're speaking. You can limit the time. You can limit the manner of what they're doing. So if you wanted to say, my suggestion would be your business is K to 12, right, maybe preschool to 12, public education in Virginia, and the business of the school board and the school division. That is absolutely legitimate reason for you to limit the amount of speech on there, and you would have to identify that. So if somebody got for business and they said, I'll use, I've got a pizza company and I want you to do pizza, you can cut them off because that is not the purpose of that. If they say, I'm offering free pizza to every kid that gets an A grade, that also probably is not your business because it's not something that you can take an action on there. If they got up and said, school, but I would love to partner with you and provide free pizza twice a week, now that might be your business. That's where it gets a little trickier on that. But you can work a little bit with that. I don't think that happens as much as, there were times when it used to happen. I don't see it happening as much as it used to happen. So you can clearly put parameters on there. You can absolutely say 3 minutes. You can say 2 minutes on there. You can limit the things that they're doing in the audience. All of that is perfectly in compliance with the First Amendment. So we can let out rules like that. I do, as I pointed out before a number of times, I do see some advantages to merging the formal item, informal item, because it limits some of the stuff that we have going in interference with it. Then you would just have to cut it off on there. The criticisms, for those of you who've been on the board a long time, you know the Bach case that came out in 2001. At that time, the Bach case is actually the case against the federal court case against this school board. And what it said was you couldn't limit people from criticizing individuals on the board. That case has been slightly altered, and the decision is a little bit different. There's a Steinberg versus Chesterfield Planning Commission board, came out in 2008, which did say you actually can limit criticism of the board or individuals on the board. But if it's actually relevant to the work that you as school board members or senior staff are doing, you have to give it a little more leeway. But if you came in and wanted to say the custodian at my school doesn't do a good job, that would be a legitimate reason to cut it off. But if you're saying it's dangerous in schools because the custodians don't know how to do a job, that might be different. So it's a limited area. You do not have to tolerate insults and inappropriate behavior at that point, but a legitimate criticism would be something you have to look at. That's why it makes a fine line down there. That's why we're very careful what we try to direct you to do. But those are all things within your right as a government body to do that. And that's stuff we can draft in more carefully on there. A couple suggestions I'm worried about, a little bit of worried about timing. Again, I would feel better if everybody had the same amount of time on there, and I think you're getting to that area. It makes it a little bit easier for us to deal with. A little bit of concern about those people with children who have children might get a priority to it. I don't have a problem with students, but if I'm not able to have a child, if that is actually one of those protected classes, I don't want that kind of argument. But I have no problem with saying students go first on there. And as I suggested, you might want to consider. One of the things I've not heard you speak about is, can you better use the time, what you call informal workshop? That's a flexibility area. Can you do something different with that? I did send up a note to Mrs. Felton on her suggestion and talking to Mrs. Owens about having students up there. You might want to look at what could I do with students in that time period. Could we bring those students in and allow them to speak during that time period before you get into some of the things that we've been concerned about them having to hear or experience otherwise? That's another area to look at, or put them right at the beginning on there. I don't necessarily want to say those people who have children get priority in the line. That, to me, could be a problem area, but I don't have a problem with saying students. That makes sense to me, that they're relevant to what you're doing. We could play with that language, but again, I think you're making good progress on some of the stuff, and we're taking notes on it. But think about some other things, and as you get into other areas like agenda, we can give some more talk about it. But you absolutely could. We could put parameters around it. We'd have to work a little bit of guidance on those tricky areas, but I think you can put more parameters than you already have.
Thank you. So,
Something she just said.
go ahead.
Okay, Mrs. Riggs.
Just something she just said. I just wanted to repeat it or make it clarify it for us. You said at the beginning, you were talking about.
Speak in the mic.
You said at the beginning that we didn't necessarily have to allow speakers that code said that our policy said that only 25% of the time. Can you explain that and repeat that?
That was a
please?
change to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Prior to July 1st, there was absolutely no law, federal, state law, any requirement that speakers had to have an opportunity to speak at government meeting, a school board meeting. You created that opportunity. That's an opportunity you created, so you can put the parameters on it. It did change after July 1st. It said at a quarter of the total amount of meetings that you have in a year, you have to offer some opportunity for the public to address them. It didn't say what areas. You could determine what areas on it. So that is a newer development. Because you have public comment at almost every one of your regular meetings, you're automatically going to meet that requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, thank you, Ms. Linetti. I just want to reiterate that, yes, I am in favor of the same amount of time for everyone, no matter what, and I would like to see us go back to 3 minutes, period. But we have not mentioned anything about Zoom speakers. So do we plan to continue with Zoom speakers? And speaking to that, I have heard from several teachers who said they hope we continue with Zoom speakers because it's difficult on a school night for them to get down here. Some of them have, a 30-minute drive down here. They got to wait around to speak, then 30-minute drive home. Then they got to get to school the next day, plus all the papers they have to grade, etc. So many teachers and staff prefer to be able to speak to us through Zoom. And so in that regard, I would like for us to continue with Zoom speakers as long as we can.
And Mrs. Linetti, is that presently in policy or bylaw, that practice that we developed a year or 18 months ago?
No, you've not distinguished between speakers. That was a rule that you came up with partially because of the pandemic, when we had to find a way to incorporate the public into meetings where they couldn't come in here, and that was an option for them, or individuals that had health reasons. You have that option. You can do whatever you want with speakers. You can also play around with how you do your speakers. Right now, your preference is for formal agenda items, it's in person and then Zoom, and then any not formal agenda items are in person and Zoom. So there it does appear to be a priority to people in person, and Zoom has limitation of only you being able to hear them. So those are also areas you can deal with, but that's fully within your realm to be able to handle.
And I guess I'm just asking, how do we certify that we're either going to continue or discontinue? What would be the process?
You've not incorporated that into bylaws, doesn't mean you can't do that. We can actually put that in there. I'm not sure that you need to limit it. I think you can choose the methods by which you're going to do it. If all your Zoom went down, all you could do is telephone, then telephone would be what you'd have to do. If you lose Zoom, all you can do in person, that may be the only option. So I don't necessarily want to say that you have to do it. I want you to look at the options. I mean, if I'm drafting something for you, I would give you the option to determine what's appropriate under the circumstances.
Thank you. Mrs. Felton, then Mrs. Holtz. No? Oh, I was looking at that there, sorry. Anybody want to follow up so far on anything that's been said? I can
Say.
Okay.
So I think Miss Linetti clarified the part about the advertising, but I want to know for sure. I want to be assured that our chair will definitely gavel out someone who is inappropriately calling out someone's name. I really worry about our staff being slandered on live TV. And as I said before, once that's out there, you can gavel them and tell them that they're out of order, but they've already done that, and the damage is done. And I worry about the fact that these non-agenda speakers can just feel free to say whatever they want to say. It's out there. You can gavel them. You can try to stop them. It's already done. The damage is done, and I feel like we're not protecting our employees by allowing non-agenda speakers to speak on TV or on whatever. I feel like we're letting them down. So that's just my opinion on it.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I was wondering if you could ask Ms. Linetti to comment on whether or not you have the ability to gavel down somebody who's talking about member of our staff. Because I was under a different impression. I've always been under a different impression. Didn't think that could happen. And that was one of the reasons that was done. But Cammie, could you talk?
I will tell you, it's a confusing area, and the Virginia Attorney General's office issued one opinion. Most school attorneys would take the advice that you need to be careful about gaveling down. I could tell you that they can absolutely come in here, and if it has something to do with your duties or senior staff duties that you control, they can say what they want as long as it's not vulgar, obscene, that type of thing. If it's relevant to their duties or how the services are being provided, that's in it. When you get down to the school level, it may not be as relevant. So if you want to come in and say that Mrs. Linetti gave my child a B in her English class and now she doesn't get to go on a trip or something like that, that's not relevant to what's in there. That would not be in there. So it's a fine line on that. That I think would be clear. But again, all of you are fair game as long as it's not so obscene. Pretty much senior staff is going to be a fair game, possibly principals at that point because of the level of what you're doing, how it affects the business on there. that would be the question we would have to look at. And that's why it's a fine line when you do that, because it's hard to judge at the time it's happening. So we tend to be a little bit more careful as to allowing the person to do it as opposed to violating the First Amendment rights. But if you did come in and you're talking about the lunch lady didn't give my kid an extra share of lunch, that's clearly out of line. That doesn't have anything relevant to do. So again, it's tricky to do that, and I would have to work with the chair or committee chairs doing this to make sure you understood the parameters and what we could handle.
Mrs. Linetti, I know we're fair game, but clarify that, please. Unless we're being accused of a crime that we have not committed, which is happening right now, can you clarify that, please?
There's a difference between defamation on there. And that's something else you would just have to deal with outside the realm on there. If it's relevant to the job and they said you stole money from the school division on there, they could say that. It may be a suggesting you did a crime, but if that's relevant to what was happening here, to deal with the slander, defamation, that's a civil issue you would have to take outside of here on there. So, if they said you shot and murdered my son, that probably doesn't have anything to do with it. But if it goes to your ability to be a school board member, that's the problem. Again, why it's a tricky area, and we generally advise to be very careful in gaveling somebody down during that, because if it's relevant to what you're doing, you're probably going to have a First Amendment right to speak to that.
I have one more thing to
Go ahead.
So the other thing that I'd like to caution about, I mean, I've realized that we're fair game as far as doing the job and that type of thing, but we're all elected. So it's very possible that we could have somebody come up here and talk in favor of somebody to be elected or not in favor of somebody to be reelected. So how do we stop that from happening if they're on non-agenda items?
You generally can say campaigning is not appropriate. I can't come in here and say I'm running for city council, so I'm going to take 3 minutes to tell you why I should not. That's not appropriate. Or on there. If they came in here and said, I do not think Mrs. Anderson is good for this position, and I don't think you should elect her, if she's talking about your duties, that may or may not be appropriate on there. If I'm advertising myself, that's probably not relevant to what's going on. So I'd have to work a little bit more in defining out the different areas for you.
Well, I just want to say that's another reason that I'm against combining non-agenda with agenda items. I just think we need to really be careful. If we know now that if people are speaking to what's on the agenda, that's fair game. But and then we don't film that. We don't put that on TV. We don't run the VBTV for that. We allow people to speak on non-agenda items after the meeting, not televised. And then we don't have to worry as much about, people having their names slandered, that type of thing. And I get it, that we're fair game because we're elected officials, but not when it comes to the political part of it. So it'd be difficult to gavel somebody and say, that's inappropriate. You're not supposed to be doing political advertising here. But we already had it happen a couple weeks ago. Somebody got up, stood up there, and they were supposed to be on an agenda topic. And they had the audacity to, talk about a governor.
We're trying to not refer to past incidents, okay?
Thank you. But, I don't want that to happen again either. So in the future, I just feel like we need to have something that talks about, specifically in our bylaws, that talks about people should not be talking about anything to do with elections or politicizing it. Thank you.
That gets back to the K to 12, but then the overlap with school board. Well, so I've been keeping track here just to kind of give an accounting and then to continue more discussion. It seems on the merging of agenda and non-agenda, in terms of who's present here tonight, we're pretty split. Now we have three members not here, one of whom has conveyed her support, and the other two didn't speak to that. So I guess that's something the policy committee could take into consideration when and there would be opportunities to reach out at that point too, or in the meantime, to those members. And there's still an opportunity to speak more to that. The speaker time limit for those present tonight is strongly leaning to a slight reduction to curb the length of the meetings. Still no feedback on, well, the other, I would look for more feedback on the agenda, the flexibility to reorder the agenda, or to actually establish in the agenda going till, say, for me, I think 8 o'clock is just a good round time to know that we will move on with other business of the board. Because sometimes we might have a number of recognitions where we're really not getting to speakers till 6:30. And that we pause at 8 o'clock and continue later. And we would evaluate at that point, before the time of the agenda adoption, whether we would have to relocate action items to that later number 19 on the agenda. So I still need a little more feedback on where you all stand on that. And then finally, just again about thoughts on a combination of number of speakers and hours. And I threw one out there for discussion, 3 hours or 50 speakers, whichever comes first. So who would like to? Mrs. Weems.
Okay, I definitely do not support in any way limiting speakers to 2 hours or 50 speakers or 3 hours or whatever. Not at all, zero support for that. As far as, changing the agenda around to get, to pause at 8 and get the information and all our presenters to do their job, I'm fine with that. As long as we hear all speakers who have come to speak to us.
Thank you. Let me see, agenda. Okay, thank you. Who else would like to comment on any of those questions? Mrs. Riggs?
I don't think we should limit speakers either. I think we should have everyone that wants to speak as well. I think somehow we have to figure out a way to cut off some of the time, because the amount of time and the time that we're making major decisions is very late. And I have no problem, I stay up late, but the point is, there's other people that have had to leave because they didn't get a chance, they couldn't stay any longer, and we're not offered that opportunity to speak. But I don't want to limit the speakers. I think everyone that signs up to speak should be able to speak.
And any comment on the pause with the agenda, like say an 8 o'clock pause and then?
I have no
reverting
problem
back?
with pausing with the agenda and saying first 2 hours or whatever, and then, do what we need to do, and then have the speakers come back and, the ones that have not spoken, be able to listen to them. But obviously, before we're voting, they need to speak before we vote on specific items that they came to speak about, so we can hear everyone and how they feel about it.
And we could ask policy to, or any of the staff involved with policy to go back to when that was the practice, I think, when I was first elected 7 years ago.
Okay.
So, just as a point of context, okay,
Okay.
thank you. Who else? Ms. Owens?
I won't belabor things that have been said. I agree that I don't want to cut off and say we're not going to hear speakers if they've signed up to speak. We need to hear everybody who's here. I obviously am in favor of cutting down time however we need to, whether that's everybody gets 3 minutes or if that's everybody, we have a system of how many speakers and how many minutes that's going to be. A blank that I was going to say. Trinace, what were you?
Want us to come back
Because
to
it was
you?
something off of what Trinace had just said. Yeah, I guess.
About the speaker, the not limiting the speakers, but
the
having a
pause.
certain time.
Okay, yep. So I'm fine with the pause and doing some business and coming back again, as long as we're going to hear everybody before we vote. The one thing that I think maybe we could look at a little bit more is when we have presentations in workshop, and then the presentations are like played out again in the meeting, and I understand that we want it to be where the public could see these same presentations, but that might be an area where we can try and regain some time in our meeting, and, people can go on, and if we can record the workshop and have people be able to go back and look at it there, or if they know that the
Well, we do-
presentations.
I mean, they are recorded and they are posted within 48 hours, just.
And so if we could just maybe look at it, I know there's a balance with wanting people to be able to see it live at that time. But it can get repetitive, and I know they try and give us kind of a shortened version the second time, but it's still a lot of time that they spend giving the same information and that we spend hearing the same information when our meetings are already so long. If there's a way we can better get that information out without having it twice in a night.
Okay, Mrs. Melnick.
So we do get emails while we're sitting here, and there has been an email that's come through, and I just want to make sure that I don't think there's anybody on this board that wants to limit speakers. And so we got an email about limiting speakers. That is not what this board wants to do. We want to hear from the public. So let me say that again. We want to hear from the public because I don't want to be accused of trying to cut people off and not wanting to hear. We do. And we should never be painted as a group that does not want to hear from the public. The other question that I have to ask is, do we give priority to Virginia Beach residents? So if somebody from Chesapeake or Norfolk signs up, of course, we don't mind hearing from Chesapeake and Norfolk, but when we were talking about students, I guess we don't have any control over that, but, just, I guess we don't, correct? Anybody?
Here comes Mrs. Leonard.
Are you asking about prioritizing or only
Prioritizing.
allowing Virginia Beach?
Prioritizing.
You could set the order on that. I would remind you that sometimes you have employees speaking to you and they don't all live here.
Yeah, that's fine. Just a constituent question, and I just wanted to ask it, so that, you answered it.
What you probably can't do is limit saying that you could only speak if you're a citizen. That's
Right,
going to be
okay.
a problem, but you could prioritize, but think about parents who have children that are in school district who don't live here. Think about your employees who don't live here.
It's okay. But I'm going to say this one more time. We do want people to come and speak. Thank you.
Chair Rye?
Who's calling? Thank you. Hi, Mrs. Felton.
I'd just like to reiterate what Mrs. Milnick said a few minutes ago, and also what Mrs. Weems has said. I think the ship of 10 speakers coming the ship has sailed. They will come in droves because we are an engaging board. We engage and ask people to come to speak, even if it's in opposition. We are not trying to limit the speakers. We're just trying to be considerate of all the other business that we have to do as a board and get it out in an appropriate time. That is it. Considering our administration, our staff, and considering those things that are important to teachers that cannot come, and they're listening to hear what their next steps are going to be. We're not trying to limit those speakers because, as you know, I sit attentively and listen to every one that come, because the conversations that we don't have are the ones that we should be having. And I think those are good conversations, but we're not turning that. I am all for all speakers speaking, but I just like to see how we're going to pause and have all other things on the agenda to come that will be appropriate and sufficient for our teachers and listeners of what the business is for the following day or the following week. Thank you.
So I guess it's a question for PRC at this point on if there's sufficient information.
For everybody else.
Mrs. Anderson.
So I'm just going to plug one more time for the fact that if we're going to take care of the business of the board and for things that we need to be voting on that evening, we need to give precedence to people who are speaking to the agenda. And I know I can tell by this group that most of y'all are not in favor of keeping it separate again, but there are warning signs out there. And there was a reason why it was separated to begin with, and we need to take those things into consideration. We need to really be careful about saying, oh, we're just going to hear everybody at one time. The business of the board needs to be taken care of, and the people who are speaking on the agenda, if they have precedence, we can listen to them and then we vote. That was the whole purpose of splitting it to begin with. So just want to.
So what I just want to do, another kind of accounting right now, and for you, Mrs. Riggs, what I see is, I mean, everybody here has weighed in on the speaker time limit, and and actually even those not here, so I think that can go, just, is that sufficient to go back to policy with that, to just, have a committee level discussion on that piece?
Yeah, we can do that.
The agenda order and the pause that we discussed, that seems to have sufficient interest to, I'm asking my colleagues to have policy review and the staff take a crack at that to see what that would look like in terms of language. I already said, based on who's here presently tonight, the merging of the two, it's very split with those present tonight. So you do with that what you see fit, and that means also reaching out to our other three members not present to help with that discussion. Right. I'll stop there for a moment to see if, the minors. That was, so I think we were hearing that there's enough support for that, for students. Thank you. There's enough
Identify
support
students.
here this evening to ask your committee to take a look at that, and
Chair Rod, could I just
please.
jump in and say that I hope that the PRC got the option that Attorney Lenetti said, and I think it's a good one to allow students to speak during a formal workshop. Did you get that down as well?
Yeah,
For
and-
consideration? Thank you so much.
That would be part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think the point was well made about better use of workshop time, and I'm inclined to think right now, if we can make somewhat headway here with some of these matters and give it a little time, but we can keep in mind, that as a next step, maybe, really, what can we be doing differently with workshop time? Unless there's a specific,
Was it about workshop time or was it about the repetition of the information?
I think both.
Okay. I've been listening attentively and I didn't hear about workshop, the use of workshop time. Could you all elaborate a little bit on it? I'm trying to take notes, so.
We'll let just Ms. Owens again.
Sure. My focus was on the repetition, and so whether that means we're not getting the full show presentation in the workshop and we're getting it here, or it's vice versa, I think having it twice is taking too much of our time, and that we could be using it a little bit differently in either area, wherever it fits best for staff to do the presentation.
Well, I think the board would want to have a conversation to get to the answer to that question about the purpose of workshop. Right, so from our perspective, staff's perspective, the purpose of workshop is to have time with the board to dive more deeply into topics that are important to us to get direction on. Many of them, as you know, don't go to votes. They're workshop topics for that purpose. And then some do go to vote. What I think I heard and what I know we could do very easily, and I'm sure our staff would appreciate doing, is during the information items that are repetitive of a workshop that's just occurred, to just provide an executive summary and a reminder that those are recorded and available for the public to watch.
Absolutely.
We could certainly do that, and that's easy and doesn't require any action on the part of the board.
Love it.
Yeah.
And to be clear, because there was a part B to this, a kind of like Mrs. Felton, that's one example, Dr. Spence, where she mentioned possibly student speakers during what's traditionally workshop time. And that's one of probably many other examples we could come up with, but am I right, Mrs. Felton? Right, okay.
Absolutely.
As the person who's probably going to have to do the first couple drafts of these, would you consider anything else that's on your agenda moving up? Student awards possibly? I know that there's reasons why you do that. Any of the recognitions or resolutions or any of that, would you move into the workshop time, or only adding possibly student speakers and the full information during workshop and a modified information on the agenda?
In fairness, some of our workshops start at 3:30, and 6 o'clock is a really fair time for families to come and really, and this is a big moment to be honored by the school board. Not everybody gets that. So in fairness, I would think saving it for the formal workshop is the best option.
I agree.
I would layer in the challenge.
The formal agenda, yeah.
I would sort of build on that and layer in the challenge for some students to come speak during workshop because their parents are the ones bringing them here. So I just would sort of caution and push back a little bit on that. Also because we time the workshops sort of to the nose to try to get you out at 5:30 because that's an expectation that the board has on its agenda. And so I think, we've already had to push several workshops to 3:30, and I know there's some concern about that amongst board members. If we're going to start having students come and speak during workshop, we're going to have to maybe push to 3. So a little pushback I'll offer from the administration on the concept of student speakers during workshop, only because there's a different purpose and there may be challenges getting them here in time for a workshop. So you may want to just consider pushing them to the front of your speaker agenda, as has been suggested a few times.
For those of you who've been on the board a long time, you remember what Mrs. Beans may be the only one who remembers this. There was a time where you took non-agenda item speakers between 6 and 6:15, and then you picked up your regular agenda after that. And we didn't, at that time, have a lot of extra speakers. You could go as long as maybe 6:30 on it. That's another possibility to think about, is that you take students right away at 6 o'clock, get them out of the way. I'm not expecting to have enormous amounts of students because we don't usually see more than 5 to 10 of them at a meeting, and then pick up your regular agendas. If you want to think about that, and PRC people, please listen up. We may have to think, that would be one of the possibilities. They would be the very first people you take up, and then you pick up the other things, like you do the Pledge of Allegiance recognition, and some of the things that you do that could happen, and then you would pick up the speakers in the normal place that you would do in an agenda, which is after some of the announcements. Anyway, PRC people, that's another possibility we can look at.
Ms. Anderson.
Go ahead, Mrs. Anderson.
So speaking of workshop, it was suggested by one of our people who's not present, but, and I'm okay with it, in that we could possibly have some workshops on the off week that we're not having our regular meetings. It was suggested by someone who's not here tonight, but I think there is some merit to that sometimes when we have a lot of things on our docket, things that we need to get covered. And I'm very much in favor of having a special workshop, at least for the next couple months, on the off week. Maybe not every month, but once a month, have just a special workshop Tuesday. We're not going to be voting on anything, but devote that workshop to things that we need to get done. We've got a lot of things on our docket coming up that we need to discuss, and sort of like tonight, we needed to have this discussion time. So I'm just going to throw that out there for anybody else to talk about.
Well, and that would require, obviously, we would want staff input on that too, but
I can provide a couple of thoughts. I've worked in a school division where there were workshops on the off weeks. Actually, I've worked in 2 school divisions that operated that way, and that can be productive. The way you described it, if it's just for a limited amount of time, I don't think you'd want to make it a bylaw change. I think you would want to just call special meetings and just have the board call it that way. If you wanted to make it a regular part of your meeting agenda, then that's where it would go to, I think, a bylaw change. So the board would need to come to some agreement on on the difference between those two things. But certainly, we work at the direction of the board, and if the concept is workshops in, every other week, staff can make that work. Then you'd want to decide, what are you going to do with the extra time you've allotted by not having workshops prior to your formal meetings, or is that the intention? That would be another question.
Just throwing it out there, because I did read the, the email that we all received, so.
Anything else tonight that we didn't capture to send to PRC at the moment? Or just any other comment? Yes.
I mean, I don't know if this is PRC, but I was just wondering, because I have not been here personally because I was out of town, but we've got the 6-foot distancing here, but we only have 3 feet of distancing in the schools. So can you address that? Because, we obviously could have more speakers here if we did the 3 feet. So that, and then also the warning letters, is that today's topic too, or is that really for PRC?
I mean, it was, well, why don't we cover the
Okay,
first?
so the 3-foot distancing in here versus, 6-foot distancing in here versus what we're requiring in schools.
Right. And that's because the guidance hasn't changed for adults and the guidance has changed for students. And so the CDC has been very clear that 3 feet is acceptable for students. That guidance of 6 feet hasn't changed for adults, and all of that drives the contact tracing discussion. So there is an exemption for students if both are fully masked at 3 feet, that they're not required to quarantine. That's part of the new guidance. And so for us, our goal is to prevent quarantining so that we can ensure that our students stay in school 5 days a week. I'm sure you're seeing what's happening as schools are opening, that they're seeing a lot of cases of quarantining, and some of that has to do with districts where they're not wearing masks, but some of that has to do also with how they're distancing and other things. The guidance hasn't changed for adults. So one of the issues that you have in here is if you do go with inside of 6 feet here and you have a contact or you have an exposure in here, the challenge becomes very complicated for the health department and for our health coordinators, because we don't know everybody who's in here, but we have to try to do contact tracing. And so, and the other challenge is that we have people who've come in here requesting mask exemptions and who showed up without masks to our meetings because they've gotten those exemptions, and that's the conversation we've had with the board. Well, if you have somebody in here with a mask exemption, they absolutely have to be at least 6 feet apart from anybody else, or you create that same issue around positive exposure, quarantining, and contact tracing. So I will add to that, we have talked to the health department about this to try to get you very clear guidance, and we had asked to try to get that information before Wednesday at 5, and unfortunately they weren't able to get that information. I was on a call this morning with the state superintendent, Dr. Forlano, who's the state health director, was on that call, and or in the State Department of Health. I'm not sure her exact position, I apologize, but and she reiterated the 6 foot rule still applies for adults, has not changed. And there are no exemptions around contact tracing for people who are at within 6 feet if there's an exposure, masked or otherwise. So that's the primary thing driving it right now, Mrs. Weems. But again, we are trying to get clearer guidance from our local health department. We do have a new interim health director, and she wants to work with us on this. And so as soon as we hear something, obviously, as we've been doing, we'll continue to update you all and see if we can't do something differently.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
So, second point,
Yeah,
yes.
the warning letters. We want to discuss that now because I don't support warning letters to our public. And I know that you and Dr. Robertson sent one out, so I think that needs to be a board discussion. Again, I think that it's very subjective. I know things have been said, and I wish that we all were civil. I wish that every speaker was civil. I wish that every board member showed respect to the public. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. But I totally understand why some people are so upset and are so passionate and say things in a very passionate way. And I tend to, sit here and take it. And I think that when we start having the chair or vice chair or the superintendent or whoever send warning letters, that's gonna be so subjective because things have been said about me that I would think would deserve a warning letter if we're gonna start doing it, and we could all say that. And so how are you gonna ping which person, which statement, which off-topic, which level of voice, which language is gonna merit a warning? Yeah, and can you legally ban them from ever coming back to a meeting? And I've said this before, I'm not in support of that at all. I think it's very subjective, and I don't think it does any good whatsoever. I think it causes more problem. And I think that we as board members have got to set the example, when we hear something that we don't like, or that we don't agree with, we sit here, and we respect that person's opinion. It has to start from us being a good example, and then hopefully our citizens can come. But people are passionate, people are ramped up, they're upset, they don't think that we're listening, I get it. But warning letters, to me, it's not good, and it's not gonna do any good, except for get people more upset. And again, if they say something inappropriate, you can, with the legal advice, do something about it here at the meeting. But I hope that we will not continue that practice of you sending out warning letters.
So let me first assure you that the reach out to board members over the summer, there was a clear concern about some developments at the meetings and a will to provide some measure of sanction. And so with all the hundreds of speakers we've had, we're talking about 2 letters that were sent out. And it was, there's a step process here where the citizens are given the opportunity. It's a matter of decorum that we're responsible for, and ultimately me as the chair, and it's a matter of parameters and reaching a certain threshold. There's precedent in the district when it comes to parents, and it's perhaps something that we can ask policy review to take a look at. But I mean, this is the opportunity now to. Again, it was a warning, which one could say it's just to say, that there's a certain threshold of behavior and decorum that's not just expected, but that the bylaw requires to conduct the business of the board. So if there's any other alternatives, but again, these were not sent without respectful requests to honor decorum in more than one day, and that's all I can speak to right now.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that also, and I totally understand the position you're in, Ms. Rye, but it's gonna get to the point where I'm gonna be able to, do I call you and say, oh, you need to do a warning letter because the statement that this lady made was a lot more egregious than that one? I mean, it's just gonna be kind of crazy.
Let me clarify first. The content of what somebody's saying is not what you should be writing a warning letter or banning someone from. It's the conduct that you're looking at. It is actually a violation of the Virginia Code 18.2-415 to attempt to deliberately disrupt a public meeting. That is a criminal offense to do. There are other offenses that relate to that. Trespassing is another issue you deal with. A lot of times when you're doing these, if you're looking at potentially filing charges against somebody, what the court wants to see is, was the person adequately warned ahead of time what you were going to do? If it's trespass, if we banned you from coming to the building, which is a procedure we do have, we have to show that we gave you notice first of what the expected behavior was. A lot of times that's why you'll see us read the decorum rules and things like that ahead of time. So speakers coming in, public watching, understands what the conduct's going to be. It is completely within your realm to determine that the conduct was done to disrupt the meeting and that is inappropriate. What we shouldn't probably look at is content. Now, you can sometimes go to content as being disruptive. If they're yelling curse words, if they're vulgar, obscene, if they were to get naked, something like that, that would not be appropriate, and you could absolutely say that is inappropriate conduct. We wouldn't necessarily throw you out completely. We try to warn, and that's apparently what you do during the meeting. You're warning somebody if they continue the behavior and they continue to do that. We need a way to which to warn them, please reform your conduct so that we don't have to take further action on it. A lot of times what we do with the individual that's causing problem at a school, we then put a limitation of access. You may come to the building with prior permission and you follow rules, and these are going to be the issues. Sometimes your behavior is just so violent, difficult, or dangerous that you just have to be banned from the building, and we have processes in place to do that. But we rarely do we start just with immediately throwing you out or filing criminal charges. We're going to look for a warning system. Now, you can talk among yourselves as how to do this, how you want to do it, whether the entire board wants to consider that. Again, I would not advise that this speaker said something I didn't like. It's not the content unless it meets one of those categories. It's the conduct or the ability to disrupt the meeting, to call staff away, to prevent orderly other people coming up, to prevent you from coming there. So if you're trying to get everybody off topic and everybody excited so that you have to bring people in and have you removed, that's a conduct issue. That is not the content of what you're speaking. If you're just saying, I don't agree with masks, and you don't like everybody to agree with masks, then I would not authorize them to send that out. I would say this is not appropriate. It's not the content, it is the conduct that we're looking at. We have processes in place that we use in a school setting. I can certainly bring more to PRC to look at the process. It could also be that we look at a situation where before something is sent out, the entire board determines whether it's appropriate to do that. I do think you need to be careful with individuals to let them know what the expectations are before you have to take more serious action. You want someone to say, please, we've asked you before, we're going to give you another chance, and if you don't give you a chance, we're either going to limit how you participate. It could be that you're so disruptive during a meeting that perhaps you don't get to come in, you may only be able to call in. We'll allow you to speak to us, but you can call in. Or sometimes the behavior is so outrageous or so violent that we just have to say you cannot come to speak, or we limit the time period. So there are ways to look at that. Now, I don't know if this is a better governance committee issue as opposed to PRC, or you decide that before you send out a letter, the entire board would have to do that. But again, if the entire board is going to make a decision, we have to be in the school board meeting to do that. So we would have to figure out how to do that. I can start drafting something with PRC. You can think about it, but I do want you to think about what do you do in those situations where you want those individuals to understand that you are serious about enforcing the decorum rules. How do we get that information to them, and who will do that?
Mrs. Linetti, would such a discussion be open versus closed? Because we were very careful about maintaining confidentiality. I wanted to mention that as well.
If it's a general member of the public, not sure it would be a closed session. If it was an employee coming up here and you were looking at disciplining them that was relevant to their work, I might consider that the employee's work. So I would have to say with the circumstances as to which we're looking at, most likely is not going to be private on there, but it would tend on the circumstances.
Oh, I just thought members should be aware of that when they provide input into this. Mrs. Holtz?
On that topic, I think the word passionate has been inappropriately used for misplaced anger and ire for people mostly that have political reasons. We're not pincushions. We should not be subjected to abuse. I want to thank the chair for sending out the warnings. I appreciate it. That's why we have a chair. And it also reminds people that they're accountable for their actions, and it also gives warning to the general public that it won't be tolerated. I mean, we can't just sit here and accept it without having any kind of response. So I want to thank the chair for doing that, and I hope it will continue. Or perhaps I hope it won't be necessary to continue it.
Mrs. Weems?
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, many of us do take some abuse from both the public and fellow colleagues, and that's, you know, what you do when you serve in a political elected fashion, unfortunately. But I just think that this merits, whether it's governance or policy, more conversation, because again, I think it's going to be very subjective of what is determined to be trying to disrupt a meeting, because with the two letters sent out, I could go back and point to 10 or 15 that were equally, maybe would warrant or merit the same thing as comments that I found very disruptive and very misplaced. So again, I just think it's going to cause a very slippery slope when you're trying to basically censure, and you're trying to decide as the chair, was it the conduct? Did it disrupt? Was the intent to disrupt? Did it actually disrupt? Or if I would have just let that speaker speak, then the next one would come up. So I think that it's just kind of an impossible thing to manage. So, again, I'm not supporting that, but I would just welcome some more conversation, either Trinace or whoever's the governor or the governance committee, some more conversation and, about that. Thank you.
Understood, thank you. Anything else? Ms. Owens?
Sure, just,
That's again within the bounds of this, and if you need to check with Mrs. Linetti.
oh, no, I mean, I don't think I do. I was just going to say that I agree that boundaries are needed and important to make everybody who wants to participate in our board meetings feel safe and secure, that there are levels of boundaries on conduct, and there's a reason for the levels of boundaries on conduct. I'm not opposed to having that conversation go further with governance or PRC about what that should look like when we get to a point that a letter is going out, and what should be included in that letter. Are we including a list of behavior expectations in there, a copy of what is expected and required? Are we, do we have any, I guess, the plan laid out about what the progressive steps typically are going to look like? And just so that everybody is on the same page, I'm not opposed to having that laid out a little clearer, and so that it's laid out and in a place where the public can be referred to in advance and not find out about it as it happens to them. But I think boundaries are important. I think documentation is important. I think letting people know both in the meeting, and sometimes they need to hear it after the meeting. If you are ramped up or passionate or disruptive, whatever word you want to use it, you may not be in a place to fully hear and understand what is being expressed to you about the boundaries. And so I think, yeah, there's merit to having that provided to you in a later venue, whether that's an email, a letter, whatever, so that you can reflect on it prior to your next visit with us. So I think that there's boundaries are needed, but I'm open to it being further discussed in whatever committee might best be handling it.
Okay. Mrs. Riggs?
I would just like to add to that too. I think that, we do need to let people know that if they've crossed a line. One of the things that we have seen and have heard from the public about and watched in the meetings are participants that are sitting in the audience, if you want to call it the audience, jeering people that are speaking because they don't agree with what they're saying. So those are the kind of things, jeering our students. I think that's what had Mrs. Felton speak. But I'm just saying those are the kind of things that are happening as well. And because you don't agree with what the speaker is saying, one way or the other, that's another thing that has been included in the inappropriate decorum in a meeting.
Okay.
So, one of the letters,
We're not speaking
okay,
directly
so
to either one.
I get it. So, some of the egregious actions that we may warn people, may send a warning letter out, basically are spelled out. I mean, the use of profanity, for example, is one thing that absolutely cannot be tolerated, should not be tolerated in any of our meetings.
So that
So-
will be included in the
I
discussion.
just mean it's already spelled out, and it's in our guidelines already. as Ms. Linnae pointed out, the conduct that's trying to get, that may be trying to get, attention brought to that person is something that they need to be warned about, that we're not going to tolerate that. And I think our public is demanding, we're getting lots of emails, and our public is demanding that we do take action about these things. They do not want our meetings to have these kind of outbursts like we've seen in the past.
So, Madam Chair, for clarification, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Is this an issue that will be sent to PRC and for,
Or governance.
or governance, and for the viewing public, that will be discussed in a governance or a policy review committee meeting, but always from there, it comes back to the board and it's vetted by the full board. So it does not, the decisions are not made in those committee meetings. But I suggest that it move forward to them
Thank you.
and let them take care of that.
Thank you. So we're up to number 4, and it does not appear there are any motions to vote on any matters relevant to this meeting, and they would have, there was just a small category that possibly would have come up, for example, the distancing in the room, but so with that, we're up to number 5, a summary of actions to be handled at a later date, and we have recapped, but we will again, the matters going to PRC from today's discussion on the meeting format. Yes, Mrs. Riggs? And as was just noted by Mrs. Melnick, raised by Mrs. Weems, further discussion on how to handle appropriate sanctions. So anything else before we adjourn? Yes, ma'am.
Ms.
Honors.
Riggs, when is your next PRC meeting?
It is the 16th.
Of September.
Sorry, it's the 16th. However, depending on, I said we would listen to tonight when we would be speaking, and we can move that to the week before. That gives us plenty of time to post our agenda and to let the public know that we're going to move it to the 9th
Okay,
at 11 o'clock in the morning.
thank you.
Assuming that works for your members.
Yeah, assuming it works for our PRC members, yes.
Okay, so September 9th at
But
11.
we'll wait for the official notice once you've cleared that with the whole committee.
Right, yeah, I need to ask everybody on the PRC, so. Okay.
All right, then. Thank you, everybody, for, Dr. Spence, anything
No,
from
ma'am.
you? All right, then, thank you all for your time this evening, and we are adjourned.